Geç mi? Ah.
Sir.
Hı.
Sir.
Su.
Good evening. My name is Haik Baldasarian, and on behalf of the ANCA of the Silicon Valley, I'd like to welcome you to a conversation with Supervisor Joe Simitian. Now, welcome, Supervisor Simitian. Thank you for taking the time this evening.
Thank you, and thanks to all who are taking a few minutes, notwithstanding the fact that there's another Joe on another station that they could be listening to right now. It's good to be with you, Haik.
It's terrific to have you. And which show are you talking about, Supervisor? You're the only Joe that we're considering. But thanks again. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Supervisor Simitian certainly needs no introduction for those of us in the Bay Area or who've been involved in paying attention to California politics in recent decades. But I should tell you that he has been elected and re-elected to the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors in 2012 and in 2016. Currently serving the 5th District, which includes his hometown of Palo Alto, as well as surrounding communities of Cupertino, Los Altos and Los Altos Hills, Mountain View, Saratoga, Stanford, and portions of Sunnyvale and San Jose. But he's been known far longer to us, having served in various capacities and represented our communities and various bodies of government, ranging from the Palo Alto School Board, City Council, having served as president of the school board, mayor of the city of Palo Alto, and went on to the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors previously in the 90s before his 12-year tenure in our state legislature as one of several, at that point, one of several Armenian Americans serving in the California state legislature, first in the Assembly and then later in the Senate. By way of background, he's received most of his formal schooling in some Bay Area universities that you may have heard of. One known as Berkeley, the other is Stanford. I'm not sure what happens on football game days in your household. It's got to be it's got to be create some tension.
It means I can walk safely on both sides of the stadium, Haik, which is good. So,
but he's you know, I have to tell you, first time I had the pleasure of introducing Supervisor Simitian was at an event that the ANCA organized with the Berkeley ASA, and you may remember that evening. It was, we had a heck of a turnout. I think there were more than 100 Armenian American students from Cal who were in attendance that night, and it was inspiring because He was serving in the state assembly at the time, and he was able to demonstrate through, what it took for someone who had the interest to serve the public, to go, what steps they had to take, and how to best prepare themselves to serve as to whatever extent possible. And and part of that was the education that I alluded to, having a background not only in the law but in city and urban planning and international public policy. Made our current supervisor, very prepared to deal with a whole host of issues. And there aren't, I think, too many supervisors, county supervisors, who've had the experience of serving as election monitors in places across the world, including, if I remember this correctly, in El Salvador and Bosnia, as well as participating in various refugee relief efforts in Albania and Kosovo, some very contentious and troubled regions over the past 20, 30 years, unfortunately. But before belaboring this too much, because people are here to hear from you and not my voice, I'd like, and there are some issues that we'd like to get into, but before we get into that, I think what's probably first and foremost on people's minds this evening, other than the National Convention, are some of the consequences of the wildfires that have been raging in our area. So is there anything that you can update our listeners with this evening, Supervisor?
Well, I think just to give a sort of a brief bottom line assessment, I think it has been really remarkable and disconcerting how quickly the fires have grown and spread. Still relatively little containment. I, in my state Senate tenure, represented not just a big piece of Santa Clara County, but also portions of San Mateo County and Santa Cruz County. Those two counties are really in harm's way right now, and thoughts go out to them, of course. For folks in Santa Clara County, the area that I represent now, we're fortunate that so far the northwest portion of the county that I represent seems to have been spared. But mostly my exhortation to anyone who is listening or watching would be, please do stay attentive. Just not anxious, but attentive, and keep a watchful eye on the status reports. I've got a member of my office staff, Jamie, who's on the line. I'm going to ask her to go ahead and post information for CAL FIRE, and I see that's going up. Here's a link that will keep you current, and you can find a directive there to guide you to the information you need if you're a Santa Clara County resident. The one thing I should say is, just within the last day or two, unfortunately, we had a false alarm, an alert that was misguided and missent into Santa Clara County from Santa Cruz County. So I suddenly had my cell phone popping from people saying, hey, wait a minute, is there really a problem? And there was not. Relatively quickly, the alert was withdrawn, but I know it created a lot of anxiety for a lot of folks in the area that I serve, and just, you regret that kind of thing. But mostly it's stay alert. That's my one and only exhortation right now. And again, there's a link that should be up in the chat now that folks can access to keep themselves well informed as we go through the next few weeks.
Thank you, Supervisor. And yes, the link is up, and those are wise words to heed. And at the end of the day, let's all, there are orders coming from our public safety personnel, please heed those. Ultimately, those folks are there to protect our lives and our well-being. And as much as property certainly has value for us, nothing can replace our health or our lives. So let's heed any orders that may be coming. Hopefully none of our listeners and certainly none of our neighbors or friends and fellow Californians will be badly impacted by this. But it's it seems like one thing after another, unfortunately, these days. And the other serious matter that you and so many of your colleagues in Santa Clara, across the state and across this nation, have had to face are the consequences of the pandemic. And I think California has tried to respond as strongly as possible, and in part complementing some of the federal relief efforts and some of the resources that have been provided by the federal government with resources on a statewide or local level. So I'm wondering, is there anything new that's been coming your way as far as resources that may be available to citizens, parents, and students who are looking back to going to school remotely, employers or employees, beyond the things that were provided in the original federal legislation? Are there things that may have not caught people's attention available, maybe more locally?
Sure. A couple of areas that are specific to the work we do at the county. Heigen, I know you know that a lot of this has to come from either the federal or state level governments, but there are in fact things we can do at the county and have been doing at the county to try and help people through a very difficult time. We have at my urging have pursued an eviction moratorium, both for residential tenants, but also for small business people who are really in a world of hurt right now. And it's not a long-term solution. I don't want to kid anybody about that. My goal in pursuing a moratorium on evictions was just to keep people safe and buy us some time, frankly, for the state and federal government to step up. I am frankly frustrated that the state and federal government haven't been able to pull together a package that has longer term implications and benefits. And at the state level, some of your listeners will know that the courts have finally said, look, we're going to have to process evictions if they are coming through the system, because the courts are not a legislative body. We have to look to our state legislature, where I used to serve in the Senate and Assembly, to actually craft a package and get a bill signed by the governor. So the eviction moratorium is one of the things that we've put in place. But again, it's a thing to buy time. It doesn't ultimately solve the problem. The fact that folks aren't able to do business, they don't have money in their pocket, they can't pay their rent, and ultimately mortgages have to be paid by landlords. So we're going to try and buy a little bit more time. In fact, this coming Tuesday at our board meeting, the issue will be coming again, but it will take a while. The other thing I would say is, while county government doesn't have the responsibility for our public schools, that rests with the 30 plus local school districts in Santa Clara County and the County Office of Education, which is a separate level of government. We are working hand in glove with them. Collaboration is good to try and make sure that information provided by our public health officer is readily available and accurate, so that folks in the school systems can make smart decisions. I'm guessing that probably all of us, if you don't have kids, you have friends and family who have kids in the system, and people are absolutely torn between wanting those kids back in the classroom learning, also freeing up family members to go back to work if they possibly can. By the same token, no one wants to send them back to school if that's not going to be a safe place for them or for their classroom teachers. So that conversation is going on constantly right now between our county public health officer and all of these local districts and their superintendents and school board members. What I would say to anyone who hasn't found their way there yet is the webpage for the Santa Clara County Public Health Office. If you just find your way there, just Google coronavirus Santa Clara County, you'll find your way there. Maybe Jamie can put up again the appropriate address, but there's a world of information there, including information that's important to business people about what is and isn't legal. And it's complex, we've got local orders, we've got state orders. We're getting mixed messages, sometimes contradictory direction from the federal government. But if you're struggling to figure out where to go, I would go to that county public health webpage. The other thing I would say, thanks again to Jamie for popping it up on the screen here. But the other thing I would say is, and I'll say this repeatedly throughout the conversation, if you're struggling to get to the right place, please just pick up the phone, call my office, or shoot us an email. And again, I'll go to Jamie to put the information up. The phone number is 408-299-5050, 408-299-5050. We'll put the email address up as well. But I make that offer because, look, government in California is complicated. I wish it were otherwise, but just at our county, we have 20,000 employees for 2 million residents of the county, an $8 billion a year budget, 70 to 80 different departments and agencies. Look, it's tough sometimes to find your way to the right place to get the help you need. So if you're struggling, please just pick up the phone and call my office and say, hey, Supervisor Simitian told me I could pick up the phone and call and that you'd be there to help. And, it's one of the things I am really proud of in terms of the team we've pulled together in our office. They really are there to help. I've got a group of smart people who care deeply about public service, and they're going to help get you to the right place. It also helps, frankly, Haig, that I've been, as you mentioned, a local school board president, mayor, county supervisor, state assembly member, state senator. A lot of folks come to us and they say, well, I know you aren't in that role anymore, but I know you could get me to the right person. So feel free to make that ask. We're happy to help in that way.
Thank you so much. And you heard it here. I have to say, I think there's a lot of anxiety. Apologize. There's a lot of anxiety. Having some audio issues, please bear with me. Okay. I sense some level of anxiety on the part of parents who, again, as you mentioned, on the one hand, they need to try to get back to work. On the other hand, they have kids to take after, and especially those who have younger children that can't be left unattended for hours on end. The other issue is that of resources. If distance learning is going to be effective, many of us are fortunate and have been able to provide our children with the electronic devices that they need to make that possible and effective. But there are many people in the community who don't have those resources. I know that the first partner, Ms. Newsom, was actually focused on that particular issue and trying to partner with many of the companies in your district that have actually, I think, stepped up and tried to be very generous and make those resources available. Are there places, if there are parents beyond the COVID-specific resources that may relate to maybe more to employment or health matters, for school-specific resources like electronic equipment?
There are. Again, I think the challenge for people is navigating the system. So if folks do need that kind of help, again, I would encourage them to start with our office. We're not in that business in my office, but we can help guide folks in the right direction. We did recently take action to try and provide some of the tablets and other tools that folks need, geared particularly towards lower income households and lower income school districts. It's going to vary from school district to school district and from school to school. And again, that's a challenge for folks to work their way through. But, ask, and doesn't mean that we can always get folks the help that they would like to have, but it does mean we can at least maximize their chances of getting to the right folks. The other thing I would say, I guess I've been doing and continuing to do a monthly telephone town hall, and we're going to do that again this Sunday. And one of the things that I want to focus on in this particular call, it's about an hour and a half for people to call in. And Jamie, if you have the information for the telephone town hall, how people can sign up to be called, please post that as well. But it's I'm told it's a great hour and a half to fold your laundry by, that people find that they can listen with one ear and take care of business with the other. But what I do every month is pull together someone who's got the healthcare background and someone who's got the legal background to help us navigate the days and weeks ahead. This particular one, this Sunday at 11 a.m., that'll go till 12:30, is designed to take a longer term look, because I think all of us now realize that while we've been scrambling to just keep up from day to day and week to week and month to month, this challenge is going to be with us for a while. So what I've asked both very well-credentialed epidemiologist and our county counsel's office to provide is a look at what are the next 6 months to a year to 2 years look like, because I think we're all at a place where we need to start thinking a little longer term about how we're going to make our way through a very tough time.
Thank you. And, I think as you've demonstrated in your responses tonight and making yourself, so readily available to your constituents, I've got to say, that's one of the attributes of your leadership over the years that I've genuinely admired. Because there was one thing that caught my attention early on from the time that you were in the state assembly, and that you would put a call out to your constituents to submit an idea for a potential piece of legislation. And I think you did this on an annual basis. The first, I had started out in local government, as you described, and I was used to literally bumping into my constituents at the grocery store. I'd go at 10 o'clock at night and I'd be in the produce section and somebody would stop and talk, and then I'd be in the frozen food section. Somebody else would have another thing they want to talk about. By the time I get over to the deli section, an hour has gone by. The frozen food is starting to melt, but I've got my third interaction. And then I went to Sacramento for a dozen years, as you say. And after the very first year, I came home and said, look, we got to find a way to pull people into the process, because all I'm doing is spending my time talking to lobbyists. And, fair enough, they're advocates for their cause. That's part of the process. But I wanted to hear directly from the people I represented. And so, I said to my team, look, I want to have a contest. And everybody kind of went, oh, no. And I said, I want to give it a fun name. Let's call it There Ought to Be a Law, which was a cartoon decades ago. And so we called it There Ought to Be a Law. And I didn't know what to expect, but I promised people that I would read and review every single application that came in. Well, the first year we got more than 100. By the time I left the legislature, we were getting 600 to 700 every year. And people say, well, can one person make a difference? I should just tell everyone who's with us, every single year we found at least one, often two or three, that were ideas we thought were both worthy and had some practical chance of success. And by the time I left the legislature, 21 of those ideas had been turned into bills that were passed through both houses and signed into law. And all because somebody thought there ought to be a law. And, some of them were quite complex. Some of them dealt with pretty simple, straightforward matters. I'll just give you two quick examples and then let you get back to more questions. But, during the rainy season, most folks now know that the law in California is wipers on, lights on. If it's raining enough that you have to turn your wipers on, then it's time to turn the lights on. Well, that's because I authored a piece of legislation based on ought to be a law suggestion, not all that complicated. I thought, well, that's a good idea, and it's already proven itself in other states. Let's give it a try, and people agreed. And so that's a law in the books today. On a very different matter, I had a constituent who came to me who said, you know what, I was diagnosed with breast cancer after 7 years of mammograms that came back clean. There's a problem for women with dense breast tissue, and they need to know that mammograms, however desirable, are an imperfect tool. And that for women who are going to the doctor, having their mammogram as they should, but then discover that they have dense breast tissue, that there ought to be a further conversation. So now, literally, for millions of California women, there is a notice in the report that they get when they get their results that says, by the way, while it came back clean, you have dense breast tissue that can sometimes obscure a good reading. You may want to talk to your doctor.
and a subject I knew absolutely nothing about until I had a constituent said there ought to be a law. And I'll just close with this. You mentioned it, Hike. We live in an area full of bright, well-educated people. And if you're an elected official and don't take the opportunity to listen to them and to seek out their information and expertise, that's just a waste of talent. So I still try to do that in different ways. I do when we don't have the COVID challenge, I try to do something like 24 sidewalk office hours a year and literally just go set up shop with a card table and a sign at farmers markets. And my wife says it's the only way to get me up early on a weekend morning and get me in close contact with healthy food. But it's a way to let people walk up and engage personally, and no filter, no appointment. If they want to say, hey, why did you vote that way? They get to. If they want to say, hey, here's what I think you should be doing, they get to. And I think people are increasingly hungry for that kind of direct access, and I think they're entitled to it. And frankly, I enjoy it. So it makes me a better elected official.
Well, I mean, it really, I think, serves to restore people's confidence in the system, because this is democracy in action. What you just described and what's happened is basically hearing directly from the people, and it not only, kind of filtering through, but actually having these concrete ideas that otherwise may not have been brought up before the legislature have actually become instrumental in changing and bettering people's lives. So it's through these sorts of efforts, and I think through the accessibility that you've shown towards your constituents, that people will hopefully gradually develop greater amount of faith. It's an imperfect system, granted, but it's the best that we have, and the more steps that are taken to make it more accessible to the general public, I think the more buy-in we'll have, and the more people will have faith that it is working for them, and it can continue working for them. Which brings me to the next subject area that I wanted to get into, which is civic engagement generally. And clearly, we have you on, and we're pleased to have you on because of the role that you've served for the community at large. But we also, as the ANCA, take a special amount of pride because you've reflected so well on our sub-community, on the Armenian American community in the state. So I'd like to touch on this in a few different ways. And this next question you can maybe respond to more generally, but I'd also, if there's some way that you'd like to direct it in particular to the Armenian American community, please do so, and towards young people generally speaking. And the general question is, beyond the "you ought to be a law" and some of the other ways that you mentioned, how can people best, the average person that might say to themselves that, nobody listens to me, or what do I have to contribute? Why should I even bother? What do you have to say to those people in terms of how they can get most easily engaged and really contribute and be part of the discussion and be part of the solution?
Sure. Hi, this is an answer that may surprise you. It starts with a question. Do you remember the television show The West Wing?
Of course. Yeah.
And you may remember that the fictional president in The West Wing was President Bartlett.
Jed Bartlett, yeah.
And President Bartlett offered the observation in one episode, and it has obviously stayed with me all these years now. Decisions are made by those who show up. It really is just that simple. If you do not show up, if you are silent, if you are absent, our democratic system in this country and in this state and in this county will punish you. If your voice isn't heard simply because you do not show up, there will be a consequence, and it won't be a good one more often than not. So the first exhortation I would offer is just show up. And will there be disappointments? Of course there were, but my experience with our community is that we're a pretty persistent group of folks, and we've had some disappointments in the political process, and we just keep coming back. When I was in high school, forgive this little sideways conversation. I was new to Palo Alto, and I had a high school sweetheart, and she went home and told her mother that she was, infatuated with a boy named Joe Simitian. And so she came to school the next day, and she said, "Are you Armenian?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am. What prompts that?" And she said, "Well, when I told my mother your name was Simitian, she said, 'Well, that sounds like an Armenian name.'" And so I asked my mom, said this high school sweetheart of mine, what's an Armenian? And the mom said, "Well, honey, all I know is they're stubborn, and there's a lot of them in Fresno." and I, with all the wisdom of my 14 or 15-year-old self, I said, "Well, that's pretty much consistent with my own experience. Yeah, but stubborn's not a bad word. It's just another word for persistent." And when I think about how long and how hard people have worked to get an acknowledgement of the genocide as an example, and finally our legislative bodies at the national level stepped up to offer that acknowledgement in a way that we had done here in California and at Santa Clara County for years and years and years. There are times when folks on the call will say it shouldn't have to be that hard, and I agree. It shouldn't have to be that hard. That's why I've tried to make access to the system easier for people. But what I would say is show up, be persistent, keep making the case. I in fact have an hour-long talk that I provide called 13 Tips for Successful Advocacy that I give to community groups, leadership groups around the Bay Area, because people are hungry, as you point out, to engage and to be effective. And there are some things that I think can help make those efforts more successful. We don't have time for that tonight, but I go back to where I started. Decisions are made by those who show up, and then be persistent. Persistence pays off in the democratic process, and we've got more stories than I have time to tell where one person did make a difference, and I think that's one of the really remarkable and still very gratifying things about our system, however imperfect it may be.
Well, that's very sound advice, and I'm definitely interested in signing up next time. I'd love to hear the 13 tips myself. As much as I've been trying to advocate for years for our community in various capacities, but always more to learn, and that's for sure. But I'm curious in terms of how your calling as a legislator, as a public servant, is bisected with your own family's experience and your heritage and as an Armenian.
Yeah.
What are the, as you think back over the span of the past 3-4 decades, as you've been very involved in public life, what are some of the most meaningful moments or opportunities to have contributed somehow to that smaller part of the Armenian side, the Armenian part of your?
Well, I'm an interesting case. Forgive me, I don't mean that immodestly. I just mean I'm perhaps an unusual case in that I'm ethnically half Armenian, although I identify as Armenian rather obviously. I have a story that is, I think, very familiar and probably similar to many of the folks who are participating this evening. Grandparents fled the genocide, came to this country, actually met and married in this country. Some of the family couldn't get into the United States, so there actually is a Simitian family history that involves the great-grandparents in Cuba, of all places. And some of that family then made their way, I believe, to Southern California. So the diaspora story that is so familiar to almost all of us is part and parcel of mine. My grandmother and grandfather made some progress, then like a lot of folks struggled during the Depression. I grew up listening to my dad talk about how my grandfather, who was a tailor, and my grandmother, who was a seamstress, had a little 2-room tailor shop, and at night the curtain came down and the cots came out, and Dad and Grandpa slept in the front, and Grandma and Aunt Virginia slept in the back. And you know, the American dream was real in that day. So my father got to go to college on the GI Bill, and then that meant he could be a teacher. And then because he was a teacher, he decided to buy a home in Palo Alto, close to where he taught, back in the day when you could afford to buy a home in Palo Alto if you were a teacher. That means I got a great education. And, you know, as is so common in our community, the importance of education was stressed, that all things were possible. Like a lot of folks who are participating tonight, I'm sure, you know, if I went to a movie with Dad as the credits rolled, you know, that's one of ours, right? That was, you know, Zildjian cymbals in every rock and roll band in the late 60s was, you know, always pointed out to me as, yep, it's one of ours. And I think, you know, part of that experience for me, I think if you have a connection to a history that involves the word and experience of genocide, I think it makes you, or it should make you, a more empathetic person. So for anyone to whom injustice is done, there is, I think, a feeling of empathy that is born out of the experience of our community. I think that's a very real and tangible and direct result of the history of our community, that you're sensitive to that in a way that perhaps someone else might not be. I also think that, in fact, the importance of the connection in our community is heightened by virtue of the fact that the genocide meant that the diaspora, you know, fled around the world to so many different places. And so, you know, there's a marvelous Soroyan saying, I may get the words slightly incorrect, but the gist of it, of course, is, you know, wherever in the world two Armenians meet, they form a new nation, and or they form a nation together. And I think that's true. So, you know, when I have traveled to Israel, of course, I go to the Armenian Quarter in the Old City and meet there with representatives of the church because it's a connection that's very real and palpable for me. When I went to Beirut in Lebanon many years ago, now more than a decade, of course, I wanted to meet with the Armenian parliamentarians who were there and spend a day to climb in the car and drive across the country to Anjar for reasons that are, again, obvious to everyone who's listening tonight. You know, when I visit Washington, D.C. from time to time, although it's been a while, you know, do I drop in on ANCA to say, you know, tell me what's up, what's important, what are we doing on Capitol Hill? Yes, I do. And so I think it's, in my case, Heike, it's an interesting connection for me because people say all the time, gee, you don't look Armenian. If I've heard that once, I've heard it 1,000 times in my life. It's also an interesting connection because I do not speak a word of Armenian. My grandmother, in order to survive, grew up speaking Turkish before she could flee Central Anatolia, which means that my grandfather spoke Turkish to her, and my father grew up speaking English and Turkish. So I literally had, and then I was raised by my mother for the first 14 years of my life, so I have not a word. And yet the connection for me is very real and very strong and very heartfelt. So I do think, though, that the genocide history informs my view of the world in a way that is something I carry with me whenever I see someone who's being subjected to the kind of treatment that they should not. Why don't I stop there? Forgive me, you got me. So.
No, I really appreciate your thoughtful response. I mean, that's, and because I share similar sentiments with folks, and I take an incredible amount of pride when I see younger Armenian Americans these days who've been sort of impassioned and have been very supportive of the plight of the African American community in this country, in response to in response to the tragic murder of George Floyd, because I think it comes from a similar place. They have maybe a heightened level of empathy because of the experience of their own people, their own families.
Well, and it also, excuse me, I think it's altogether understandable that we take such pleasure and satisfaction in seeing the young people from our own communities show their excitement and their passion for participating and making a better world. You referenced the students that we met with all those years ago when I was in Beirut. Of course, before I could go to Anjar, I had to, of course, stop and meet with the Homenid men in Beirut. You know, you talk to the kids who have some sense of the possibility of what they can contribute, what they can bring to the effort, and the pride with which they do that. And I think, you know, we're at an interesting time in terms of folks' sense of identity. I had actually set out this year, at the beginning of the year, to spend some serious time this year thinking about issues of identity, which are in part about race and ethnicity, but not entirely, obviously. And then, of course, we've had this national awakening on issues of race within the last few months. But I really wanted to give some serious thought this year. I set aside some time and have thought about it a lot. And I keep coming back to the notion of what I refer to as unity in diversity. And there's been this, I think, not terribly productive debate, sometimes argument between those who say, no, it's all about assimilation, and others who say, no, it's all about multiculturalism. And, you know, what I would say is, look, we can create an overarching umbrella, a sense of community for all of us as Americans, and still be who we are, and still be mindful of where we came from, and still be mindful of why that's important and why it gives us pleasure and satisfaction and pride. And you can do all that, as I say, consistent with membership in and participation in a larger society and a larger sense of purpose that is the American experience. This notion of unity and diversity is not much discussed, but it has deep roots in both the faith and political realms, and it's an approach I hope we will give more thought to as a country as we figure out how to be who we are and still celebrate what binds us all together.
I absolutely agree. One ought not negate or diminish the other. You know, I feel enriched by the fact that I feel an extraordinary sense of pride in my Armenian heritage and in my adopted country of the United States as an American. I think, you know, our nation has been enriched by the constant infusion over the past few centuries. It's, I think, people who think that there's an either or proposition maybe need to look at it a little bit more broadly, but I appreciate your sentiments there. You know, the one thing we've been going on for quite a while, but there are a couple of issues that I'd like to touch on that you already touched on with respect to the Armenian American community and concerns and experience, and some relate to the past, as you mentioned, the genocide, although not entirely isolated to the past, as we witnessed here in the Bay Area when the only Armenian American day school in Northern California, KZV, was attacked. It was a victim of a hate crime with just awful, hateful, disparaging language painted across the entire facade of the school building and the Armenian Community Center on Brotherhood Way. So you're aware of that, and that's, I think, one of the ways that the ancient history and the hostilities are still very relevant today. So I'd like you to touch on that in a moment, but before we do, kind of focusing just briefly on the Armenian genocide in terms of where public policy and Armenian genocide intersect. I'd like to focus on the aspect of genocide education.
Yeah.
And whether it's in California generally or within the schools, the school districts in Santa Clara County specifically. Now, we've been fortunate in that we've had a legislature and a state Department of Education that's been fairly responsive. So it's been incorporated into the curriculum framework. It's even part of within the education code pursuant to some legislation where it's highly recommended and school districts are encouraged to teach it. And then as I mentioned, the school board put in quite a bit of language in terms of what ought to be taught. The question is, and the issue has been of putting that into practice within individual school districts and schools. And part of what had been missing are the resources. And the ANCA, or the Bay Area, takes extraordinary pride because our former chair, Roxanne Makashian, Rafi Momjan, who were board members, they saw that there was a vacuum and they helped develop what emerged as a separate nonprofit, the Genocide Education Project. And they among other organizations and nonprofits in the state, provide the very needed curriculum materials and training materials. So trying to keep this brief, how can we most effectively make sure that those resources end up where they should in the hands of school districts and teachers, so that the current and future generations of students are taught about the Armenian genocide? Because I've got to tell you, one thing that's really shocked me is that something that was really well known, I think, to our parents' generation and the greatest generation is now sort of slipped out of the collective memory of many Americans.
Well, I think a couple of quick responses, Heike. One is, I think advocacy district by district is going to be necessary. We might wish it were otherwise, but it's necessary. So here in Santa Clara County, where I'm currently doing my work, we have 32 school districts that teach at the K through 12 level. So, you know, for better or worse, that means you got to make the case district by district, sometimes school by school, sometimes teacher by teacher. And what I would say about that is that it is best done in partnership with other allies so that it does not appear to be an effort to propagandize, but a genuine effort to educate. And so finding friends in the community who share a commitment to social justice, who share a commitment to a truth-telling about history as it really was, is I think, going to be important in the success of these efforts as we continue. Doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to make the case at the state level, but it does mean that as long as we're going to make the case at the local level, we need partners and allies who are friends and neighbors who can help make the case as well. The other thing I would say is that, you know, all of us have a role to play in making sure that the memory of the genocide does not become fainter and or we're still an afterthought. I mean, you know, people ask me, you mentioned Roxanne, who I think is on the call. I met Roxanne when I was doing a genocide remembrance ceremony at Santa Clara County in the late 90s. And she said, who is this guy? You know, where'd he come from? And, you know, we then, the practice continued after I left the Board of Supervisors at that time. And that was the point, was that someone else would carry it on and that people would continue to talk about the importance of this memory and the recognition. And then when I was in the state legislature, I could take that action on the floor of the California State Assembly and the floor of the California State Senate. And I always worked hard to pull others in, particularly folks who represented significant numbers of our community wherever they came from, but also others who just, shared a commitment to truth telling. Because again, the goal was not to keep this as our precious story. The goal was to say, how do I make sure others understand the importance of the story beyond our community? And the last thing I'll say, and this part's going to be a little provocative perhaps, the last thing I'll say is, and I think we have to tell that story without hate in our hearts. And, I had opponents and deniers who would come to the Capitol almost every year for the dozen years I was there. And I remember sitting in the committee room making the case, and the opponents talking about how this was a hateful gesture to simply acknowledge the reality of the genocide. And I just looked right at the chairman and said, Mr. Chairman, and colleagues, you know who I am. You know I have no hate in my heart. I'm offering the resolution in recognition in the hope that a better understanding means that this never happens again. And, the resolution was adopted unanimously year after year. But I think it can sometimes be hard to make the case in quite that way. And I do think as we do this work and try and keep the story alive, the memory alive, the commitment to recognition alive, that we will be more effective if we do it without hate in our hearts. And if we communicate that in our every word and gesture and deed. Forgive me, I know I'm sounding a little passionate about the subject, but I have a strongly held view about how we can best make the case. And the other thing I would say is, if you have to be provocative, you have to be provocative. I don't know if you're even aware, in 2011, as a member of the California State Senate, I made the judgment that I would lead a delegation of senators to Azerbaijan. We went on a trip to Turkey, Kurdish Iraq, and Azerbaijan. And there were some who raised an eyebrow about that. And I said, I think it's important for folks in all of those places to know that an ethnic Armenian American, is a member of the Senate and a leader of a delegation. Now, following that formal delegation, I, of course, wanted to stop off in Armenia and Yerevan for a visit, which I did. I also then went for a visit to Artsakh. And as you know, that's forbidden in the view of the Azeris. And all of a sudden, I got an email telling me I had been declared persona non grata by the government of Azerbaijan, that I was blacklisted and never to enter again. And, I had no qualms about that. I was determined to go, to see for myself, to talk with leaders of the community. When a reporter from the Sacramento Bee asked me how I felt about it, I tried to be respectful, but also communicate my feelings. And so what I told him was, it was essentially a decision I could live with. Let's put it that way. And, as I say, so in some ways it was provocative for me to go to Azerbaijan, and in some ways it was clearly provocative for me to then visit Artsakh. But I felt both of those visits were important, and in each in its own way made a statement. And I think it says more about the government of Azerbaijan that so many good women and men have been blacklisted over the years than it says about the folks who are on that list. I'll let it go at that.
Well, I think it's a compelling statement when someone who's clearly trying to approach the issue in as broad-minded a way as you are, as open-hearted a manner as you are, and taking the initiative of visiting both Baku and then Artsakh, only to find yourself blacklisted. So that's
well, and it's why we haven't talked about the marvelous high-tech growth in Armenia and here with folks from Armenia. But I was struck by the fact when I flew from Baku to Yerevan that of course I couldn't go directly, even though it would have been what we considered about a 30-minute flight on Southwest here in California. I had to fly to Tbilisi, Georgia, where I spent 13 hours in a coffee shop watching an endless loop on a video machine because there was only one flight to Yerevan from Tbilisi, and I had to, fly out of Baku in the morning and then wait all day to get the flight to Yerevan. And you realize, all right, if you're going to be blockaded, literally and figuratively, then what's the one thing that they cannot deny access to? And the answer is, what's up there? So, if we've got the intellectual capital, and we do, there's no stopping that. And I think that's, it would be a source of great satisfaction and pride regardless, but given the geopolitical situation, I think it's just the smart way to develop an economy that can withstand, whatever comes at it from other directions.
No, it's you segued right into essentially the final topic that I really wanted to touch on, which is this incredible growth in the IT sector in Armenia, which has captured the attention of officials at all levels, including,
Yep.
I think your counterparts. I know Congresswoman Eshu representing the district, Congresswoman Spear, having also recently visited Armenia, are excited about those prospects, and conversations with Governor Newsom. There's the sort of reestablishment of a trade office, which was initially created during your tenure in the legislature and then went by the wayside along with all the others back in during that time. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts about opportunities, particularly for public-private partnerships, in terms of how enhanced relationships and can actually benefit both the local economy as it looks for additional markets, as far as Silicon Valley and Armenia, in terms of, so how could local businesses, and I should mention, even though many of our listeners may know, that many businesses, whether Armenian owned or not, based in Silicon Valley, have established operations in Armenia over the past 15, 20 years, which has been encouraging. But I'm wondering if you have thoughts of, how to move forward in that direction to create even more opportunity for both the Silicon Valley economy, as well as the economy.
Well, a lot of that work, as you referenced, gets done at the state or even city level where there are economic development offices. But we do have what we call PICs, private industry councils, where some of that training work gets done. And so I think there are some opportunities there. I remember when I visited the technology park in Yerevan on a couple of occasions, and there walk through classroom after classroom of very focused young students who I think were in an ideal setting because the education they were receiving was directly related to the requirements of the work they hoped to do. I think we could do a better job of that, frankly, in our own system. I think our community colleges are, frankly, an underutilized resource in that way. People have a concern, which I understand, that we, not turn our public education system into essentially a privatized system. But I really do think we're missing the opportunity to do more in terms of training. I think, obviously, support for the growth of education in Armenia. Half a dozen years ago, I had the opportunity to be one of the commencement speakers at AUA, and my wife teased me. She said, "You're going to fly 14,000 miles to talk for 14 minutes?" And I said, "Yes, I am, dear." And but I think whatever we can do to expand educational opportunities in Armenia is all to the good. And then I think part of it is just continuing to tell the story and spreading the word, because it's for folks who've discovered the opportunities both here and there for the cross collaboration. I think it doesn't take long for them to get it. But I think there are a lot of people who would still say, "Where? Really?" And I remember after the AUA graduation, talking to some of these bright young grads and their excitement about the possibilities. I just think we have to do a better job of connecting. And so the event, I'm sure some of your listeners were at the event at Synopsis a couple of years ago when the premier, now president, came to visit and talk and share. I thought it was important for me to be there just to make the statement that it was an occasion of significance. There wasn't more really to do at the county level where so much of our work is safety network, social well-being, healthcare. But again, just telling the story over and over again. It's why I think the piece was in Forbes, if I remember, not long ago, talking about these issues, and I remember thinking, good, the story is getting out there. Part of it is just making sure the story is told. Like,
thank you. I'd like to try to wrap up fairly soon, but what I do want to inform our listeners is that this is something that we've been striving to do, particularly these sorts of conversations in town halls, meetings with our officials in the Bay Area, particularly since the onset of COVID, to give everyone a chance to continue the sort of interaction we would have had if we weren't in this predicament. But it's something that we've taken some pride in and trying to deliver this sort of information that you've provided to our listeners tonight. We do have an upcoming program in a couple of weeks that's going to be focused on primarily on the elections and also on the census count. That's I think it's going to be in its final weeks over the next through the end of August and September. That'll be on September 8th. So please look for further information about that and do sign up and register for that. The ANCAs, both of the SF Bay Area and Silicon Valley, they're familiar institutions to many of you, but for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we're the part of the network of the largest political advocacy organization in the country, and we try to create bridges and relationships with our policymakers, our elected officials, and their staff, so that as Supervisor Simitian alluded, so that we are present, so that we do show up and we are part of the conversation and we're not left out. And that's what the ANCA strives to do, is to be the voice of our community. So we need to hear from you. We need your participation. As the supervisor mentioned, there are 32 school districts within Santa Clara, and we need to be able to connect with all of them. So we always look for ambassadors to take our case, to make sure that their teachers know about the resources that are available to them. And whether they're student ambassadors or parents, and we stand ready to assist and facilitate that process as well. But before we close, and I'd like to leave you, give you the opportunity to close in whatever manner you'd like, but there's one particular issue that I hope that you'll mention if you have any particular thoughts about, and that is Beirut. You mentioned Beirut a couple of times during the course of this evening, and ANCA in particular, because it happens to be where my wife was born, and so they're near to our heart. There have been, as a consequence of COVID, ANCA has been facing severe challenges already over the past few months, and then after the devastation caused by the explosion in Beirut a couple of weeks back, it's this now the entire country is suffering with upwards of 250,000 people homeless. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that personally, or what we can do collectively, and then if you have more general thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with before we
sure. Let me let me make the offer once again, and indeed more than offer, really ask all who have any inkling of a desire to get engaged. Let my office help if you have that urge, and I hope you do. I think, as I said earlier, government in California can be awfully complicated with 58 counties and more than 100 local governments just here in the Bay Area, and 500 cities statewide, and 1,000 school districts, and thousands of special districts, and that's before we even start to talk about the complexities of state and federal government. So we can. I sometimes describe the role. One of our roles is to be the air traffic controller and help you land safely in the place you're trying to get in the array of governments that serve. So as I say, either pick up the phone 408-299-5050 or shoot an email. And again, I think it's been posted in the chat room. This is not a gratuitous offer. This is something I think is important for our office to provide to any and all who call and want to find a way to get engaged. I think, the tragedy in Beirut, I spent, I got to Lebanon, and I'll close with this story and observation, because I was headed on a delegation with the California State Senate back in, 2007 now, so it's been a while, to both Jordan and Israel. And I thought, I think Lebanon is one of the untold stories of the Middle East, at least it was at the time. And I wanted to learn more, so I made arrangements to travel by myself after the official delegation was completed. And I had a lot of people who raised their eye, really, you're going to, go by yourself? And I said, yeah, my experience has been that with a little advance work, people are anxious to help you understand their story. And I certainly found that to be the case in Lebanon. I thought it was both a beautiful country with wonderful people, but if you're coming from the American experience, the notion of a government founded on 18 separate and distinct sects is a little hard to fathom. And I talked with people there about that kind of representation. And Haig, if you know the country, the president's seat is set aside for one sect, the prime minister's seat is set aside for another, the speaker of the parliament another. I remember asking the parliamentarian I went out to dinner with, how many seats in the parliament do does the Armenian community have? And he said, well, it's complicated. And I thought, well, how complicated could it be? He said, well, there's this many for Armenian Apostolics, but there's this one for the Armenian Catholics. And then, by the way, there's this one that's for evangelicals, and it used to be for the Armenian evangelicals, but now it's for, and I thought, oh my God, this is, beyond my comprehension as someone who comes from the American system. But here's my point. What is being revealed in the protests today is the fact that the Lebanese people still struggle to find a way to create that unity and diversity that I described earlier as an aspirational goal. And it is hard for us to imagine a Lebanon that can be viable as a nation state over the long haul, that can pull together as one nation, until and unless they find a way to take those 18 separate and distinct entities that are each a political force unto themselves and pull them together in common purpose and understand that they have a common vision for the nation of Lebanon. And it is a very different place, of course, than our country or our state. But I think it's an important reminder of just how absolutely essential it is to find unity and diversity. And I think it's something that our community, as part of a larger set of communities, as part of a larger nation, has understood well for a long time. And I hope we continue to play a role in the community that reflects and respects just that kind of understanding. Thank you to everybody who made time tonight. It's a busy night, I know, with that other Joe on your screens, and I appreciate the fact that you took time to be with us. And I appreciate the time and the fact that you invited me to be with you tonight, Haig, and all the folks at ANCA. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you, Supervisor. And thank you, everyone, for having listened tonight, and we look forward to having you follow our future programming. Thank you so much. Have a good night.